Les voy a hablar un poco de Ian Gauci, que es nuestro invitado especial. Él es de Malta. Es Managing Partner de GTG Advocates, Afflection Alliance and Calido Group. Es asesor de gobierno, de industria y de diversas autoridades. Es miembro fundador de la Asociación Maltés de Abogados de Tecnologías de la Información y Blockchain Malta. Y como ya lo presenté, Ignacio Varese es organizador, estará a cargo de esta charla junto con Ian. Él es ingeniero, cofundador de Blockchain Summit Global y CEO de Blockbear. Así que Nacho, lo dejo en tus manos. Simplemente lo saludo a Ian y le digo, welcome Ian to our summit.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ian.
Good morning, Ignacio. Good morning.
Hi.
Hope everything is okay.
It's really okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. For me, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ian Gauci, a friend of the house. It will be an amazing presentation. We are very honored to have you here in Legal Tech Summit, that you have been with us since the first Blockchain Summit in 2018. So you came to Uruguay in 2018 and also 2019. You like so much Uruguay, so really, really happy and honored. And well, for me, it's a pleasure and honor to have you here. Dr. Ian Gauci, it's outstanding expert in legal and technology field. He held many conferences all around the world, and today is here in this conference, in the first Legal Tech Summit. So very, very happy and honored. Thank you, Ian. Very welcome.
Thank you, Ignacio. Good morning, Montevideo. It's a pleasure. Yes, Uruguay, Montevideo, it's people. It's a second home for me. I cherish every moment I spend there, and even meeting you and attending the previous conferences. Regrettably, till now, we're still shackled to online. I hope that this will change soon. But nonetheless, I hope that I will give a very brief presentation of what's happening in the EU on the AI front. Okay? So if you allow me, shall I start, Ignacio?
Yeah.
Ignacio,
Yeah.
shall I start the
No, pero está bien,
presentation?
porque sí, vos te das cuenta que no está la niñera,
Yes.
Yo decía, vos te imaginás que...
Okay. So today I'm going to give a presentation. It's a little bit different from the ones I've given before. It's not tied to blockchain, a specific jurisdiction. It's tied to what's happening in the EU on the AI front. In the past month, we've seen a new trend. It started within the European Commission, where there was a draft regulation, and today we're going to discuss this draft regulation, which was aimed specifically to regulate AI, regulate the technology. This is something which is quite innovative, okay? That might have some repercussions. We've seen later on as well, the United States, the National Security Commission on AI, NCAI, also going on that particular front. They want to have a regulation on AI, and they want to make sure that this particular technology is catered for. Ultimately, the end objective of these regulations is going to be to protect stakeholders, to protect us, the users, individual end users and society in the whole, which is very much in line with the goal as well of all technology regulation. Now, this is also similar. When I came to Montevideo some years ago, I also spoke about the Maltese legislation. Malta is a country in Europe. We also have our first AI legislation. We have certification as well. However, we have a little bit of a distinction from what is being proposed in the EU regulation to what we have in our legislation. And I will be highlighting the striking features as we go along as well. So what is the European regulation proposing? So the European regulation in lawyers' jargon is proposing two things. Similar to what happens, for example, in the telecommunications industry, you have ex-ante requirements, so requirements which occur before AI is placed on the market, and you have ex-post requirements, which are similar requirements which you have in any type of business where, for example, You might be selling cars. You might be selling newspapers. Where ex-post obligations will came because of transparency. You might have your competition authority. You might have another authority regulating the field. This will happen as well in AI. So here we have ex-post and ex-ante. Now, in the first part of the presentation, I will be speaking about the ex-ante requirements. So I've listed 6. So the first, and I will be explaining each individual requirement in a little bit more detail as we go along. So the requirements, before any AI is placed in the market, according to the proposed regulation, first somebody will need to check if it's banned, and the regulation caters for this. If it's not banned, then you need to check if it is deemed to be high-risk AI, and that is defined. Okay? If it is deemed to be high risk, then automatically whoever is going to place AI within the European market needs to follow a conformity assessment. Once that conformity assessment is exhausted, okay, you have what is called a CE marking, which is already present in the EU, and now it's going to be extended to AI. So with that CE marking, that particular AI, similar to other products within the European market, can move freely, okay, within the EU. And in order to bolster this, okay, that particular conformity and CE marking, so that particular AI conformity with the regulation is registered in an EU database. So when a regulator, any country can see that that particular AI is conformant with the AI regulations. Once this sequence happens, then any provider, any user, okay, any distributor can place, and that is the last facet, can place the AI in the European market. And then eventually there are ex-post obligations, which I will be discussing. So let's start with the first one. The first one would be that you need to check whether it is banned AI or not. The European Commission here and the regulation is proposing, is attempting to protect end users. So instead here of prohibiting a certain action, for example, instead of prohibiting mass surveillance, instead of prohibiting specific facial recognition, instead of prohibiting, for example, classification of trustworthiness and social scoring, it is prohibiting AI doing these functions. That will be banned AI. So in this case, it is tying all the activity to AI, to the technology, okay? Until now, we have parameters, we have principles, but the European Commission, given that it is still in draft form, has not as yet provided guidelines on how these principles will be interpreted. We anticipate that there will be guidelines. Otherwise, the risk of interpreting these provisions will be on the provider, on the distributor, with the risk of very heavy fines, similar to what we have in Europe under GDPR or competition law, fines which can reach up to 6% of total worldwide annual gross revenues of the particular entity, 30 million, okay, so quite hefty fines. So there's a lot of risk as well on the producer, on the distributor, okay, for somebody who releases the particular AI component on the AI market. We anticipate that the European Commission will clarify this as we go along, because this is still a very fresh, young draft regulation. Now, if the AI is not banned, if it is banned, you can't do it unless there are the exemptions where it is allowed under specific circumstances. If it is not banned, then a particular producer, before releasing it on the market, as I explained before, he needs to assess whether it is high risk. And usually high risk here, under the regulation, will be captured under 3 different facets. You have Annex 2, which covers for high risk AI within the existing legislation. So within existing transport directives, radio equipment, medical devices, we have the medical devices regulation, which already caters for software, for AI, machinery, safety equipment. So once those are captured within the respective legislation, not the AI regulation, then those will be deemed to be high risk. Then there are another corollary of high risk activities which are not captured in a lex specialis, in a specific law like transport, like health, but nonetheless, if they touch areas like employment, like administration of justice, so even legal tech, okay, essential to private and public services, etc., biometric identification, they will be deemed to be as well high-risk applications. Then there's the third criteria, and that is the list which can be updated by the EU under delegated acts under the proposed regulation. So that would be deemed to be then high-risk AI. Now, what happens if something is deemed to be then high-risk AI? So if something is deemed to be high-risk AI, and this is very much in line as well with what we have in Malta, because we have certification for AI and we have as well conformity assessments, that particular AI product, given that it is high-risk AI, it needs to follow a conformity assessment. So it needs to have conformity checks in order to ensure that the underlying technology is sound and safe. It needs to carry as well continued monitoring, and it needs to monitor as well the development of the particular technology. In this case, it's AI. The draft regulation as well covers this because it mandates specific things which the conformity assessment needs to cover. Yeah, for example, it's very similar to what we have as well in financial services when you have organizational obligations, okay? So you need to have risk management system, you need to have high quality data sets, technical documentations and record keeping, quality management systems, transparency and information for users, human oversight, so human centricity as well, robustness and accuracy and cybersecurity. And this is very important as well, particularly since I am delivering a presentation for a non-EU country, which is Uruguay. If there are providers who are providing high-risk AI from outside the EU shores to provide it within Europe, along with the conformity assessment, along with all this classification, they need to have an authorized representative as well in the EU. And that authorized representative needs to be either a natural legal person, okay? And he is responsible to provide all the documentation to the respective authority in the country within the EU where he wants to place that particular AI. So somebody who wants to tap the European market and is not European needs to adhere to this particular condition as well. As I had indicated in my first slide, following the conformity assessment, then there is the CE marking. So the CE marking is like a mark of trustworthiness within the European Union. It is used as well for products, where we have product safety, where with that particular mark, you are attesting to the fact that the AI product, in this case, because it's going to be used within the AI remit, has followed the European regulation, this draft regulation, and this in conformity with this regulation. So it is safe for that product to be placed within the EU. But not only that, along this CE marking, to make sure that all the member states within the European Union have visibility on which AI is deemed to be safe and which AI can, to a certain extent, move freely within the European borders. The European regulation, draft regulation, is suggesting as well as proposing that there is a centralized database. So each respective authority in each respective country, when they have a particular AI product which is deemed to be safe, they need to a certain extent list it in this database, which is centralized, and that is shared along all the European bloc. That will permit that particular AI to move freely within the European Union. So it can be provided in countries like for example, Malta, Italy, Germany, France, Spain. It will have freedom of movement within the particular European bloc, for like words. And that is through the CE marking and through this particular centralized database. But things don't stop there. So when you have the centralized database and the CE marking, to a certain extent, you can place the product, the AI product, in the market. However, when you place the particular product in the AI market, as I said before, we touched on ex-ante obligations. So those obligations which kick in before the particular product, the particular AI product is placed on the market. Once it is placed on the market, then there are ex-post conditions as well. And these exposed conditions need to be followed thoroughly, because otherwise the particular developer, distributor, producer, okay, will face serious consequences, because the fines, as I said before, are very hefty. And not only the fines, but he can be as well liable through civil redress from the particular users if there is a particular prejudice or damage sustained by the particular user. So even there, here we're trying, the European Union is trying to a certain extent to cover the user holistically in a 360-degree scenario. So before the product is placed into the market, and even afterwards, to make sure that during the lifespan, it follows the same ether, the same protective principles that are mandated in the draft regulation, which might become regulation in 2 to 3 years' time. Now, but what does the regulation per se cover? Who is captured by the regulation? So in legal terms, what is the regulatory capture? Now, and this even here we see a distinction with, for example, the laws which we have, for example, in Malta, because the regulatory capture under the EU draft regulation is quite wide. It covers users, because users, even users when using AI, which is safely placed on the market through this procedure, are obliged to follow the instructions of the particular provider. So users are captured as well through these draft regulations. It covers as well importers. Why? Because importers are obliged to follow the conformity assessment I described before. It covers as well distributors, because the distributors are responsible since they distribute to have the CE marking. So it covers the distributors as well. Now it covers any third party. Why? Because whether you are a user, importer, distributor, and third party, irrespective of your nomenclature, if you place an AI product in the market under your own name or in your own trademark or through your own trademark, okay, then you become a provider. So in that case, the regulation will apply full gamut, okay, even to you, and you will be deemed to be a provider. So even there, we're seeing that the European Union has a very clear intention to regulate and regulate thoroughly here. Now, it is regulating technology, and it is something quite new. Because even in telecoms, in other industries, in blockchain, you never regulate per se the technology. You regulate the harm, you regulate the action which you deem to be problematic. So this would be quite new. And this, we are anticipating that if not catered adequately, can provide certain problems to an nascent technology like AI. Why? Because to a certain extent, we still don't know what AI is. Until this regulation, we did not have a concrete definition of AI, okay? This regulation, draft regulation, is attempting to capture that. So I am anticipating that, yes, the intention behind this legislation is good. The intention is to protect the user. The intention is to protect the investment. The intention is to make sure that AI is safe. The intention is to make sure that AI is a tool for the user, and there's human centricity. But we will need to refine a lot of processes, because here we are capturing AI and we are not targeting the real abuse. The real abuse is where there are specific actions which, irrespective of the technology, should not be allowed. So this is my very brief presentation on the draft regulation. If you have questions, please ask, and I will be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ian. Great presentation. And I have a couple of questions. Does the IA draft regulation introduce the sandbox? What can you tell us about it?
Yes, this is a very interesting point. Here I have to tie it in as well with what we have in Malta, because this is something which I had suggested to the Maltese government quite a long time ago, and I had written about it as well. And we have it in Malta as well. In Malta, we have the first pure technology sandbox. What do I mean by pure technology sandbox? Which is similar to what the EU is proposing here. I believe it's Article 53 in the draft regulation. So usually you have sandboxes for data protection, for financial services, fintech, Usually these sandboxes have accelerator models, okay, embedded in them, but it is tied to a particular service. Here, the sandbox is tied to a particular technology. It's a technology sandbox. So in this particular sandbox, you might have services dealing with health if they use AI, services dealing with financial services if they use AI, and that is high-risk AI, services dealing with transport if that particular AI is used within that particular remit, education, because it captures technology. And it will make sure, the intent behind it is to make sure that the AI is tested where there are certain things which are not clear. Regulators can see the actual implementation, can see the actual co-development with the developers. So you make sure that before you place the AI, before the actual legislation kicks in to make sure that you are in conformity and in line with the legislation, you test this product so that it is in line a priori. So this is quite innovative. And yes, it is within the AI regulation. I don't know if I answered your question, Ignacio.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Ian. And I have another question. I am understanding correctly, the AI draft regulation aim to regulate the AI technology more than the regulate the unwanted effects. What are your comments?
Yes, you hit the nail right on its head. I commented briefly on it before. This, for me, as a technology lawyer and with a very heavy background in telecoms as well, is a little bit. I will not use the word problematic. Let's use the word alien, because here we are tapping directly at technology. When in my experience, every legislation that I was involved in, every directive that we've implemented was to a certain extent, I think you're familiar with the concept, technology neutral, technology neutrality. Here it's not neutral at all because here we are directing the particular regulatory capture on the technology. So let me recap it. The approach here is based on regulating AI as a technology rather than addressing the application. So rather than, for example, if you say that mass surveillance is not good, if you say that facial recognition is not good, you should regulate mass surveillance or face recognition irrespective of AI. Don't regulate or ban it solely because it is being facilitated through AI, because it can be done through other means. And not only that, even when you're trying to tap directly into AI, there will be problematics. Because it could be that you have something which might not fall within the very fluid definition which we have in the regulation, and nonetheless still do certain measures which the regulation wants to prohibit. But through a lacuna or through a lax interpretation, it would not be captured by the existing regulation or the draft, because up till now it's a draft, so we're going to see evolutions. So I see that as a little bit problematic. For example, in our case, and I need to stress one thing. Here, the whole procedure is mandatory. So you don't have a discretion. For example, contrary to Maltese law, in Maltese law, we have a legislation which is technology neutral. It caters for blockchain, it caters for AI, it caters for any technology which might be used in critical instances. The certification, the conformity is voluntary, unless you have a specific authority, for example, health, where you have a particular technology which is going to be used in health, and the health authority will say, listen, I want that particular technology to be certified, to be in conformity before you use it. So there, it is not because you have AI or it's because you're using a technology, it's because you're going to give a service in a particular industry which is regulated. And the regulator told you, before you get that service, irrespective of the technology, I want to make sure that the technology behind it has a conformity assessment, has a certification. Here it's different, because here we're saying under the regulation, in all instances, even if there is no particular
Bueno, tenemos ahí una pequeña interrupción. Veníamos bárbaro, Nacho.
Sí.
Veníamos, pero bueno, estas cuestiones, a veces la conexión falla. Justo falló ya en el cierre de Ian. No sé si a vos te quedaban muchas más preguntas para
No,
compartir con él.
estábamos cerrando,
Ah.
la verdad muy claro y muy interesante.
Esta reunión está siendo grabada.
Ah, bueno, si esta reunión está siendo grabada, entonces esto de inteligencia artificial y estas voces que aparecen por ahí. No, realmente muy interesante escucharlo, ¿no?
Sin duda, el tema de regulación de inteligencia artificial es un tema muy importante que se viene, cada vez es más importante cómo ha avanzado la inteligencia artificial en todos los ámbitos de la vida y bueno, sin duda es un tema que Europa está un paso adelante ya pensando en todo el tema este regulatorio de inteligencia artificial. Y bueno, Ian, es realmente un honor tener justamente a una persona que asesora a los gobiernos en
Sí,
Europa,
al más
así
alto
que
nivel.
es realmente impresionante.
Bueno, y esto de la inteligencia artificial y las conexiones nos permiten recuperar la conexión con Ian. Welcome back, Ian.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Problematics with technology. We are all fallible.
You can finish, Ian.
No, that is precisely it. So yes, you've hit the nail right on its head, Ignazio. Here we have a specific regulation tackling directly technology, and in this case, tackling AI. And at a juncture where you are a technology person, so you're understanding me. Nobody knows exactly what AI is. There are still people who think that even machine learning to a certain extent is AI, okay? There are still people who think, for example, that if you automate a process, you need AI. You can automate a process without AI. There are automated processes which do not need AI. AI facilitates. AI can take us at a level which, for the time being, we can't even fathom. So for me, it is a little bit, I have two positions. I feel safe seeing that there are people thinking that we need to be nurtured as users. We need as well to be protected, because that is the case. But I feel worried that we are trying to capture something which is so foundational, so new, it's so uncharted, that to a certain extent, this, even though the intent is good, it can have more negative repercussions. So my baseline is that it could be that the regulation, if it is left as is, okay, it might pose more problematics than solution. And I'm anticipating that after all this, the major problem will be what is going to be deemed to be AI and what is going to be deemed to fall under the regulation. So that we're starting from the beginning. We have a fantastic, literally a fantastic process for protection, ex ante, ex post. But if we start having problems right at the inception, at the beginning, where people will just question, okay, but I am providing this, but this is not AI, because the definition does not capture it, or if I tweak it a little bit, it will not be AI. Then we're going to have massive loopholes. I mean, this is my 2 cents worth of comments. I am pretty sure that the people behind this regulation are more than capable to cater for these issues, but they need to be catered for, because there are lacunas, in my view, in the proposed draft.
Thank you, Ian. Very clear as always. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, as always. I say have you here, and thank you so much, Ian. The time flies, and
thank you. A big hug to all Montevideo.
Yeah,
and well done.
Of course.
With this very good work, all of you.
Of course. Bye bye.
Ciao.
Ian.
Ciao.
Ciao.